and hear your recommendations.
Yeah, and I think I love some of the things that have already been, talked about. I love some of the things that you shared in what you just talked when you talked about resiliency and leaders, Susan. So there's some really great ideas to already build on, but some additional strategies. I think that the one thing that's available right now that we can all do, whether we're in a leadership position or not, is limit the negative news that we're listening
So
to.
true.
I mean, neuroscience tells us that we are wired in such a way that our brains have this negativity bias. That's how we're wired. And so, the positive aspect of that is that it helped us to survive in the wild. That's why we have it. Especially helpful if you're being chased by a bear. However, it's not so useful in this current crisis. And I loved what, Susan said about, if the quote that you shared about fear, that if that is kicking in, that you're out of the present moment. And so while this negative news, and I'm just as guilty as the next person, because at times I'm glued to the television.
Me too.
So I know how hard it is. But we need to now more than ever really be disciplined about when to watch the news, how much of the news to watch. So, limiting it, not before bedtime, for example, like to unplug at least an hour before we go to bed. So it's not the last thing in our minds, having that impact on our thought patterns. Maybe limiting it to once or twice daily, so that we have enough other things that are happening in our day that can neutralize the negative news that we're exposing ourselves to. So it's really important right now that we limit that. Releasing stress and anxiety. That's fundamentally really, really important. I know you're both going to talk more about that, so I won't go into a lot of details, but it's taking simple steps, like making sure that you do have a good night's sleep. Making sure that you have a bedtime routine, and routines in general are helpful. I'm glad that you brought up about habits, Susan, because they're so important. And so having a habit around bedtime or exercise, I know when we first went into stay in place orders, and I work from home. But when we first went into this work from home mode, the stay in place orders, I had to give up my my personal trainer, who we go to visit. And it threw me off for about a week before I realized I have a treadmill in my basement. I can do this myself. And so it was a matter of simply just creating a new routine, and so doing something every day, making sure that we, eat healthy meals, that we laugh often and regularly. Laughter is a great medicine. So even if we have to sometimes pretend to find something funny, like pretend laughing is okay too, right? It gets us going in the right frame of mind. Staying positive, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. Really turning those negative thinking into positive thoughts and actions is really important. If you recall that diagram that I had with the 4 circles, your thoughts do impact your emotions, which impact your actions. So changing your thoughts, changes your outcomes. And I know it's simple. I know it sounds simple, and I know it's not easy. So it does take practice, and practice does become a habit. And so this idea of forming habits is really important. And in fact, it's funny because Susan reminded me about something just before the call, which I made a note of to make sure I included on the call. And in one of my recent articles, I did a book report. I'm going to call it a book report, a book review on Atomic Habits by James Clear. Atomic Habits by James Clear. So actually quite a good book. And he had he took that framework that I used with the 4 circles, and he had kind of put a different framework on it. So it's same concept, different framework. And he says there's 3 layers to behavioral change. One is outcomes, or what you get. 2 is the process, or the what you do. And the 3rd is about identity, which is what you believe or who you wish to become. And so again, you know, it's the same concept as what I talked about in terms of beliefs, thoughts, and beliefs. But he claims in his books, if you focus on the identity of who you wish to become, then everything else falls into place. And I love that notion. So, for example, if you want to be seen as a leader through this crisis, then you simply have to ask yourself, what does that look like? What does a leader managing through crisis look like? And the more you kind of keep asking yourself that question, you guide yourself to that identity, and that forms everything else that you do. And I like that simple kind of behavioral framework. The last point that I wanted to make is about, this is kind of an unusual time. And so what I would say to my clients, and what I have been saying to my clients, is the things that you thought were important a month or 2 ago may not be important today. Mm-hmm. And so whether you're a business owner, or whether you're a leader in an organization, or whether you're an individual contributor, it's a great time to kind of relook at those priorities, both personal and professional, and reprioritize, because guess what? The world has changed, and it's okay for us to reprioritize, get rid of what no longer serves us, which no longer is valid, and refocus on what's important right now. And that's what I would say, you know, in terms of some strategies that you can take right now.
Mm-hmm. Well, very, very useful, especially the idea that leaders coming in to see you are going to have to be focused on the fact that the world has changed. I love that point, that things really have changed. It's not about a matter of waiting for